You're tuned in to another Old West vignette, and today I'm standing in front of the Verdugo stage stop. In those days, there weren't vehicles, there were stagecoaches, and the locomotion of those was horses. And so horses were your lifeblood, and you couldn't drive horses too long, especially during the hot summer months. So there'd be stagecoach stops spaced intermittently along every one of these routes. And behind me is one of the buildings that serviced that type of function. So you'd leave Tucson, go up to Picacho, and on the way to Florence, about a third of the way there, here's the Verdugo stage stop. You'd stop here, you'd get off your stage, rest your legs a little bit, probably change horses. There's a corral that I'm gonna also get some footage of after that. Switch horses out on the actual stage stop, maybe actually get a little bit of a snack or even a break. There's a bunkhouse and there's a bed in there, and we'll talk about that in a minute. You'd get the new horses, get fresh, cleaned up, and then keep heading on. Because you got to remember, these were long, slow, arduous trails and routes. So this was built in the 1870s. It didn't last as a stagecoach route for too long. In 1913, this had been abandoned for quite a while, and a guy named Juan Verdugo actually found the ruins and turned it into a homestead under the Homestead Act and decided to make this his home and his ranch. But I'm going to go through the building and show you what it looked like to be in what was an 1870s stagecoach stop that essentially hasn't really changed much since then. All right, so here we are walking up to what was the original stage stop. As I said, he raised the roof a little bit. Those holes there are drainage pipes, so these roofs had a very slight slope to them, and water would drain out of those holes. In the old days, there'd be pipes there for that. Right now, they're not. Now, this site had been somewhat restored and refurbished in the early 2000s, so it's in better shape than it used to be. Let's go ahead and walk in and give you a tour of what a stagecoach stop would have looked like. This would have been the main room. This is where you would have done most of your business. There would probably be a table in here for dining, for actually getting some food and sustenance. And there's usually a bedroom, which would have been right here. Again, the roof has been refurbished. But this would be a stop to actually get some rest. There'd be some bunks in here for the travelers or the stagecoach drivers for them to take a little bit of a break, especially during the hot summer months. And that is it. The guy that ran the stagecoach stop would live here full time, and this is pretty much his entire home. People lived out here in what would have been a very, very remote location. In fact, it's still a very, very remote location today. This is quite a ways out. Now there's some improvements to the corral there, and we'll get that in a minute. But that's what you had. This is very typical of a two-room stagecoach stop. If you've watched videos that we've done on InRange before about the Dragoon stage stop, very similar, except this is a little bit improved compared to what they had in Dragoon, which was just built out of piles of rocks. So once again, a main room, probably a table there for dining, some tables in here to just rest and relax, maybe play a game of poker on the way to Florence. Then in here would be where you would actually have the bunks to get some R&R. Bunks aren't here anymore, of course. But you get an example of people living out here really were on their own. There was no help to be had. Still isn't today, really. You're not at this location. And that's all you had. You're on your own. If you got attacked by Indians or others, self-defense was paramount. And that's where part of the mindset of the American self-preservation, the concept of American self-preservation really still exists today based on this type of life. So let's go ahead and take a walk outside. And over there you still see some of what was the original corral. Now obviously this has been greatly improved over time, but when the corral was built, it's listed as being built as just stacks of mesquite wood. And you can see today that some of those stacks of mesquite wood are still functioning as the original corral. So when the stagecoach stop was running as a stagecoach stop, this is where they would have kept the horses, but then this got expanded when it became a ranch, and as a ranch it became a place where they would bring in the cows and the cattle and the beef. But in the day, this probably was about the same dimensions as the original corral. And you can see it's just built out of really just a bunch of mesquite piled together. You made do with what you had. So as I said, this location was turned into a farm, a homestead by Juan Verdugo, and that's why it now has the name the Verdugo stage stop. And he increased the structures a little bit as it became a ranching community. Kids needed to have education. That building over there was actually considered the schoolhouse, which then later became the bunkhouse for the cowboys that were still working here as ranchers in the 1980s. So in the day when you had kids out in a community like this is how towns actually started to form. Something as simple as a little small stagecoach stop turned into a home Well, as other people pop in around here and make little makeshift homes and such, well, kids need education and a schoolhouse forms, and that's what you see here. But like I said, that didn't last very long. This community never became much more than what you see now, and this just became the bunkhouse for the cowboys. Let's go ahead and take a tour of that. So this was built later, and therefore it's a larger, a little bit more significant structure, but it also had to house more people. You see some more modern architecture here in construction, probably improved during the 80s of concrete. The building itself is still Adobe, but this is just much bigger. This is how this Adobe construction was done. If you're not familiar with Adobe, this is really just Arizona dirt and hay mixed together with water, baked in the sun, which become bricks. And then you put a plaster layer on top of that, and it's actually an excellent building material out here. It's also a very good insulator. This is a very wide wall, and that width of this wall not only provides structural rigidity, but also insulation from the terrible heat. Also, having a high elevated roof also helps with the heat. Heat rises, and by having giant thick brick mud walls, a lot of the heat doesn't even get into the structure. People living out here in the 1870s would have been very remote, but this is not a place that wasn't uninhabited before that. In fact, in just a moment, I'm going to show you that just a few miles from here, we're going to go ahead and see some stuff and evidence of people living here as early as 0 AD. In fact, the Hohokam culture lived around here from 0 AD up into the 1440s or so, and they're the precursors and predecessors and ancestors of the Akimel O'odham and other indigenous people here of Arizona, and they've left a legacy as well. So people think southern Arizona is this uninhabitable desert, and the reality is this is a very inhabitable place. In fact, it's one of the oldest inhabited parts of the earth, the planet in reality. But we're here north of Tucson right now, just a few miles away from the stagecoach stop that I was just showing in the video, and we are at the site of an extensive Hohokam Village. Now, the village of the Hohokam were the people that were here before the current indigenous people of this area, which would have been the Hohokam O'odham, or the Gila, the Pima, and of course the Ende, the Apache, and the Navajo north of here. But they saw the Hohokam as their ancestors. And the Hohokam left behind incredible amounts of what we now call petroglyphs, or rock art. These rocks sit in the hot Arizona sun so long that they get a black glaze on them. And the village site here was here for so long that the people entertained themselves by making art and telling the story of their lives. I'm at a mountain right now that is quite literally from the bottom to the top covered with Hohokam art. The Hohokam were in this area from as early as 0 AD up until 1440, and it's not exactly clear why they disappeared, but around 1440 or so, pretty much all evidence of the Hohokam vanished. And then after that, we see the rise of the current indigenous tribes like the Tohono O'odham, the Ende, etc. But these petroglyphs are considered sacred to a lot of those people because it's the voice of their ancestors. If you watch one of our other Old West vignettes touring the Cochise stronghold, there's an area there called the Council Rocks. And during the Apache Wars, what was left of the Apache resistance would sometimes go to the Council Rocks to converse with their ancestors and try to get advice. No different than the petroglyphs you see behind me. But these petroglyphs really did tell the story of things, seasons, lives, births. And I'm going to show you some pictures and some video of some of these petroglyphs around here. Quite honestly, it's too extensive to even show them all. There's so many of them here. But we'll give you a couple of the better ones that are more easy to describe and understand. Here's another example of a day in the life of the Hohokam. Here we have people of the village near their farming community. So I am not an interpretive petroglyph expert. I know some of these, but not all of them. However, some of them are more obvious than others. Let's go to one right over here that is very obvious. Here is a woman giving birth. You can see, obviously, she was just recently pregnant. Here's her new baby and the umbilical cord right here. So we see the miracle of childbirth here etched into this rock from who knows. This could be literally 2018 years old, or as recent as, only 1440 AD. But this is no newer than 1440 AD. This has been here in the Arizona sun for that duration of time. I wasn't exaggerating when I said this entire mountain is covered. It's petroglyphs there, petroglyphs here, petroglyphs there, petroglyphs there. Let's walk over and look at a few more of them. Now these look a little bit like psychedelic art. I don't know how to interpret these, to be honest with you, but they're very interesting to look at, and it is pretty mind-numbing to realize how long they've been here. Here's some more people. There's a guy with, it looks like he's running away from snakes just at his 11 o'clock there. You can see him, and he kind of looks like he's like, oh no, and there's some snakes in the upper left there. Here's another cool one that we can identify still to this day. We have a guy here on the left, and what we now refer to as a horny toad, a desert horny toad. Someone saw one of those lizards out here and was inspired to make a picture of his cool little find in the desert. So these guys still live out here today. In fact, I see those lizards in my yard quite regularly. So pretty cool to see something that's there for maybe 2,000 years representing something still running around in my yard today. Here's another one we can still identify today, a ram or a deer. Another person inspired by the natural environment around them, painting a picture on the rock varnish of the creatures that they also coexist with. One unfortunate thing you do see happening out here as more and more people find petroglyph sites over time is that right there, that damage that you see right here is not natural. Someone liked whatever that petroglyph was. They came out here with a chisel and they chipped it away because they thought it was more important for them to have it as home decor in their little Mick mansion somewhere. And so they just chipped this rock away, took a part of our human ancestry and essentially our heritage and history away from everyone in the public for their selfish desires. That's a real shame. It is illegal. Of course, as you can imagine, in a remote site like this, it's hard to enforce. But here are some ancient 7.62 by 39 cartridge casings, left behind obviously by the indigenous people of somewhere. That little guy there with the dot in the head certainly looks like the symbol from the industrial band Einstürzende Neubauten, if you're familiar with them. I can help but think about them every time I see that symbol, essentially the Mensch, or the man. And this idea of a stick figure with a dot in the head, you see it in many cultures, interestingly. Here in the Hohokam petroglyphs as well as in Europe and other places. Hey guys, if you ever decide to investigate a petroglyph site, let me say one thing. Do not touch the actual petroglyphs. This rock varnish isn't fragile, isn't the word, but the acids on your fingers will actually eat away from them. So you want to be very careful about touching them. So if you're crawling up the mountain, you want to crawl on the rocks that don't have the petroglyphs on them. Here's another recognizable animal with some clouds above him. Well guys, here's unfortunately another example of archaeological vandalism and theft. You can see there's a herd of deer here. They didn't get all of it. There's some deer there on the left, little baby deer at the bottom left, some moms and dads. And then this chipped away area probably looks pretty cool hanging in someone's little mansion in somewhere in Tucson or wherever it's been absconded to. I hope they appreciate it hanging in their living room and that they stole from the human community as a whole. And they feel good about that because now you and I don't get to experience and look at that. So thanks whoever did that, but at least we get to see this little bit right here. Well, here's another very easily understood petroglyph. Here we have a guy under the very, very hot, radiant sun. As you can see, again, a symbol that looks familiar. It exists throughout many cultures, including here in the Hohokam petroglyphs. But this was the bright, bright sun, also the bringer of life, and that's why you see this as a cyclic motion of bringing life to the people on Earth. And they understood that the cycles of the sun mandated a lot of their lives. But here he is, hanging out in that heat, just like we do now today, with some sort of animals near him. I can't identify those anymore, but very interesting, poignant picture of what that person's day looked like, probably hanging out there doing his work in the fields. Well, as I said earlier, here's one of the grinding areas. So people were sitting up here on this hill, grinding their grain into a flour at this mill, which was nothing more than a rock in the hand into this stone. They did it for so long that they've actually bored out this bowl shape into this rock. That tells you how long these people lived here and how much labor they put into this site. If you saw our Old West vignette about the Kochi stronghold, there are monos and matates there as well. And this is another example of it, although a much older one. And their view, if they were sitting here grinding that flour here, would have been just pan up, and their village was right there. So imagine, maybe 2,000 years ago, someone was sitting here, slowly grinding grain into flour, right here in this hole. A sunflower growing under the very radiant hot sun, with birds flying overhead. I mean, a picture of life, way back when, out here preserved for us. And, just above it, some lizards running around on the rocks. Thank you for watching another Old West vignette here on InRange TV. I hope you found this as fascinating as I do, because within a few miles of remote desert, we have literally traveled over 2,000 years of human history. We saw here the Hohokam period, where a large village settlement right here at this site had the time to grind grain into flour and paint, essentially etch art into rock varnish for us to see 2,000 years later. Just a few miles away, we see the stagecoach stop built in the 1870s for the territorial period, which then turned into a homestead and and then a ranching community listing up until the 1980s. So, I mean, just a small little portion of the Arizona desert contains this much historical richness, and that's kind of a fascinating thing. I know a lot of Europeans think, you guys' history isn't that old, and in the grand scheme of things, it isn't that old. I mean, Tucson dates back to 1776 by European standards. It goes way back if you want to include the indigenous people and the Hohokam and beyond that. But in regards to that, the amount of things that happened here over a short duration time make it a fascinating place. And the stories of the people that came here before us make it what it is today. And we see that life still continues in a different way, but still in the cycle that always exists, or hopefully always will exist if we don't make too many stupid mistakes, right? So guys, thank you for tuning into this. I hope you enjoyed it. Please consider supporting us on Patreon. We are a wholly Patreon-supported endeavor. We take no ad revenue from anywhere on the internet besides Patreon. It's truly you that keep InRange alive and allow us to make content like this that otherwise really wouldn't even be on not just the TV, but definitely not even on the internet, because it's not views that keep us alive, it's you, the viewer. If you can't do that, please just subscribe to the channels and share with your friends. Thank you for watching.